Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Inspiration. I'm your host, Pastor Carl Lucas of the God First Church in Spanish Lake, Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us. This morning, I want to talk about Tamar's Trouble with a subtopic, I Got You. This morning, as we enter into this text, I want to pay attention to Genesis, the 38th chapter, around the 6th verse. It simply says, and Judah chose for his oldest son, a wife from the Canaanite tribe named Tamar. And the Bible says, and was evil, and God slew him. Again, we want to talk about Tamar's trouble. Subtopic, I got you. In order to get this, I want to go back to last week. On last week, we talked about choices. We were introduced to a young man named Joseph. This Joseph was a son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons total. But Jacob chose to make Joseph his favorite son. Because of Jacob's choice, the other sons hated Joseph. And the Bible says one day Jacob sent some food to the older sons who were working in the field by Joseph. Joseph goes to the place where they were supposed to be working. They had left and went to a different city. Jacob chose to walk the extra mile in order to get them the food. So the Bible says when they saw Joseph, they chose to plot against him to get rid of him, because they chose, if they were going to pursue happiness, Joseph needed to be out of the picture. So the Bible says that before they got there, Reuben, the older brothers, chose to intervene and told them, instead of having Joseph blood on our hands, why don't we just put him in a pit? So they chose to throw Joseph in a pit. Then the Bible says they chose to sit down and eat. They chose to eat the same food that Joseph walked the extra mile in order to get them. So Joseph chose to go an extra mile, and they chose to repay him by grabbing him and throwing him in a pit. And then the Bible says they saw a band of traitors. Judah stands up and say, why don't we make money off of him? So they chose to sell him to the traitors. As chapter 37 ends, Joseph has been sold to the traitors. He's on his way now to Egypt to be sold as a slave. I want to find out the end of the story. So I turn to chapter 38. And to my dismay, I find that in the middle of Joseph's story, there's a sub-story. And I wonder why it's such a sub-story. Because when we get later in Joseph's story, it'll all make sense. But in this particular instance, the Bible says that Judah had left his brother and went to the land of the Canaanites. Listen to me. Last week, they thought they would be happy if they just got rid of Joseph. Sometimes we think if we get rid of one thing, we'll be happy. But the Bible said Judah had left his brethren and went to the land and married the Canaanites. I want you to understand something about the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the Israelites' arch enemies. The Canaanites were those worldly people, while the Israelites were godly people. But the Bible says that was so evil that God slew him. The one who was supposed to represent God was so evil that God slew him. All of us know evil people. But when you marry somebody who you think supposed to be like God, someone who's supposed to be with God, and they're so evil that you got to live with them, Tamar had some problems. She had to live with her evil husband until God slew him. Well, according to Jewish customs, whenever one brother died and the other brother stayed with him, the Bible says that the second brother was supposed to marry the one who died's wife if he didn't have any kids. So the Bible says that in this particular instance, Onah, being the second child, was supposed to marry Tamar because had died. Well, Judah had convinced him to marry her. And I believe he married her for two reasons. The first reason, according to Deuteronomy 25, whenever the custom happened and the brother refused to marry the spouse, the widow, I find out that they had to go, the widow could go to the elders, tell the elders. The elders would try to talk to the brother. If the brother still refused to marry her, then the elders would call a town hall meeting. And then the widow would be able to walk into the brother who refused to marry her, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and for the rest of his life, that man would be known as the one with one sandals. In other words, the one who's been disgraced. So I believe Onan didn't want to be disgraced. But the second reason I believe Onan married her is because he didn't mind dealing with the juice. He just didn't want to deal with the tree. He knew that the first offspring male child would be able to carry on the name of his brother. And he didn't want his brother's name carried on through him. So the Bible said when they had relations, he allowed his seed to fall on the ground. So Onan decided that he would take matters in his own hand. Instead of doing what the custom was and doing what was right, he decided that he would do what he wanted to do. As it was, the Bible says, and God declared him evil as well, and God slew him. Well, here it is, Tamar has left her family and came to this other family, this Israelite family. And this Israelite family, one brother had died, now the second brother had died, but the third brother was yet too young to marry her. So here it is, she's a grieving spouse 2 times over. Here it is, the younger brother is too young to marry her. But Judah says to her, his daughter-in-law, you go home to your people. And when my son get old enough, I'll come back and get you, and he'll marry you. But the Bible said Judah thought in his heart, Tamar is the reason my sons are dead. She must have done something wrong. He never thought that the household of faith or the believer or the God people were the ones who caused the problem. So the Bible says that he had no intentions of allowing Tamar to marry her youngest son, his youngest son. Tamar goes home to live with her family. And then the Bible says Judah's wife dies. And when his wife died, he goes through a period of grieving. After the period of grieving, the Bible says that one day he was on his way down to Timnah to watch his sheep get sheared. But Tamar had heard about him coming. So the Bible says she derived a plan. She took matters in her own hand. She took off her widow clothes and she put on a harlot clothes. She put the veil over her face and she stood outside the town as he was entering Tamar, and she solicited him. Now, I need to make a side note here. How did she know that Judah was that kind of person that would stop for a harlot? How did she know that he would give in to her evil schemes? I believe he had a pattern of dealing with harlots. I believe the reputation was already known that Judah was a person who frequented the harlot house. That's another story all by itself. But as it was, she sit by the road, and when he came, he solicited her. And he asked her, what would it take for me to be with you? And she said, what are you willing to give me? He told her, I'll send you a young goat. She said, well, what you going to give me as collateral? Well, he said, what would you like? And she said, why don't you give me your signet ring? And I want your bracelet, and I want your staff. Now, representing the signet ring was everything that Judah stood for. You see, your signet ring said, this is who I am. It says, this is my covenant agreement. Your signet ring is what indicated that you are who you are. It depicted your character. Your signet was as strong as your character, but he was willing to give up his signet ring. He was also willing to give up his staff. Staff represent power. It represents direction. It represents correction. So he was willing to give up the thing that gave him power. He was willing to give up the thing that gave him correction. I find out that when you are in lust, you can never be satisfied. And you will sell your own soul because you are in a lustful situation. That's another sermon as well. But as it was, he was willing to give his ring, his staff, in his bracelet as collateral for this harlot. So he went in with her. About 3 months later, he got word that Tamar was pregnant. When he got word that Tamar was pregnant, he now want to be self-righteous. He called for her and said, we're going to have her burned and killed because she had violated her oath. Now remember, this is the same man had made a decision that he wasn't going to allow his younger son to fulfill his oath. So he sent for her to have her killed, but when he did, she sent a message back to him. And what she simply said was, the man who got me pregnant, he gave me these as collateral. Do you recognize him? And can we find this man? When he looked at the staff and he looked at the signet ring and he looked at the bracelets, he realized that he was the man. So he wouldn't become the laughing stock of a community. He decided that he would do what was right by her. He never was with her again, but the Bible said he did not have her killed. I want you to understand, Tamar had experienced some bad things in her life. Tamar had to experience 2 husbands dying. Tamar had to experience being left out and left over. Tamar had to experience being discriminated against. You see, as a widow in those times, you were not a person of status. You were the person who had to depend on everybody else's generosity. She had to experience going back to daddy's house after leaving daddy's house. She had to experience being lied to. She had to experience being betrayed. So she took matters in her own hand. But here's what I want you to understand. No matter what you did, even though Tamar had trouble, I want you to know that God got you. Even though she messed up, and even though she took matters in her own hand, God had her. Because sometimes God will intervene even though you messed up. The Bible says when Judah realized that he was the man, he said, she's more righteous than me. I want you to know, if you dig one ditch, you better dig two, because the trap you set might be for you. So Judah has set a trap, but it ended up being the trap. You don't know like I know what God has done for me. So I need to talk to you. You're lonely. I need you to know weeping may endure for a night, but joy will come in the morning. Hang in there, because God's got you. Even though people don't turn their back on you, God got you. Even though you look like you went backwards instead of forward, God got you. Why do I say God have you? Because if you look in the book of Matthew, the 1st chapter, when they talk about the lineage of Jesus, the Bible says Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob had Judah. Now hold it. Jacob had 12 sons, and Judah wasn't the oldest. But I found out that Judah's name appears in the lineage. I found out that Judah's child, Tamar, that he had by Tamar, names appear in the lineage of Jesus. I found out that the thing that they rejected ended up being a blessing. So I can tell you, no matter where you come from, God could turn that thing around. Tamar had trouble. Yes, she did. A dysfunctional family. Yes, she was isolated. Yes, she was betrayed. Yes, she was bribed. Yes, she was used. Yes, she was misused. Yes, she went through. But then in the end, God had her. God hear you. He knows your tears. He knows your struggle. He knows what you're going through. He knows what you're suffering right now. But I want you to know, every good thing that he have on your plate, he will give it to you. It may not come when you want it, but I promise you, God who started a good work in you will complete it. Hang on in there. Tamar had trouble, but God had her. You may have trouble, but God got you. Stand when nobody else stand with you. Even if you made a mistake, even if you took matters in your own hand, just know God got you.